Okay, welcome to a portion on particle flow. So what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly show you just some basic particle flow stuff, and then we're basically going to start diving right into the actual creation of the effect that we want to do. So if you're familiar with particle flow, you should be able to follow pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to standard primitives and I'm going to go to particle systems. I'm going to make a PF source. So this is the emitter that we're going to use to basically create our particle system. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to center this to the world. So I'm just going to click on 0 and make the Y to 0. Alright. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to make sure I rotate this 180 degrees so that it's pointing up. And what we're going to do is we're going to try out just a few things. So if you're not familiar with particle flow, you can just see some of the just basically see how it works a little bit, and working with forces and stuff like that. So under the PF source, if you click on the PF source and you go to the roll down, under setup there's going to be particle view. On the particle view there basically are our options to edit the emitter and basically how it's going to behave. So when we create the emitter, we created an event. That event is event 001. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to rename the particle emitter I have right now to FX_emitter. So just to keep everything organized and know which emitter that we're working with. So we have our FX emitter and we have the event that was created. And below we have all the operators that we're going to use to basically help with the effect. So if you play the timeline, you'll see more particles coming out of the emitter. So what we're going to do is we're going to mess around with this stuff, and we're going to play with some of the operators and just see how everything works and how we can create the effect we're looking for. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try adding some operators and show you how some of them work. The first thing I'm actually going to try out is the force operator. So if we click and drag the operator into the event, you'll see that we have this rollout to the right of the particle view, and basically what we're going to do is that we're going to add some forces in here to show you how the particles are going to react. And what we're going to do is that we're going to mess around with two forces for now. And if we go to space warps on our control panel here on the right, and if you click on forces on the rollout, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a wind. Now the wind force basically will affect the particles depending on the direction of the wind, and what I'm going to do is basically play around with this. The second one is going to be the vortex, which basically is going to help spin the particles. So these are some of the forces I like to use to really create some really cool particles moving around in different directions and stuff like that. So these are really two cool forces to play with. So I'm going to do right now, just quickly, I'm just going to set up something real fast so you can actually just see what's going to happen to the particles. So I have my wind set up and I have my vortex. So I'm going to go back to my particle view. I'm going to go back to the forces operator that I created, click on add on your right, and basically just click on the forces that you created. So I'm going to click on the vortex, and you can see the particles did something weird, and then I'm going to click on the wind. And there you go. Now you can see something's happening there. So I'm going to play the timeline. You can see what's happening to them, and they're going crazy. So the forces are doing their job. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to just play around with some of the settings for these. And if we look at the vortex emitter, it basically takes the particles and spins it around basically the time that it's in. The wind, depending on its pointing, is basically affecting which way the particles which way the direction is going to. And if you mess with the vortex, you move it from left. If you rotate it and whatnot, you'll see how it affects in certain ways. So these, really two cool ways to mix these two up to create a really cool effect, and basically how they're handled and whatnot. So you can come up with a lot of really cool stuff just using, a few simple forces. And for the vortex, if you look on the right in the parameters, it has a time on and a time off. Basically, what happens is the particles that are in between those times are affected by it. So I changed it to 50, so you can see that the vortex ends basically at 50, and the particles just go on basically doing their business. So depending on the timing, is basically when the vortex is affecting the particles. So you can play around with that, try out different times, basically just to see how things will work. You can play with the taper a bit, which if you play with the taper, you can just see how the particles are affected from basically from the ones that are being emitted first, and depending on the value that you choose for the taper length, the particles would react pretty differently. So playing around with the taper a bit is really cool, and doing a lot of render testing, you can actually see just how they are being affected. And the captured motion, there's a lot of things under the captured motion, like how basically the axle drop off stretches the particles more or less, and changing that, you can see how it's being how the particles are being affected. So playing around with a few of the settings, you can just see how the particles are being are reacting. And you can definitely imagine doing this setup, what each force does, and by that you'd be able to sort of understand exactly how they're going to behave when they get to one point to the other. Another force I'm actually going to try out here. Hold on, I'm just gonna click here. Actually, let's go back to particle view, and I'm going to go back to the event. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to organize this a bit. I'm going to go to the shape operator. Actually, I'm going to go to speed first, and I'm just going to go to position icon actually, and click on the roll down on the location, and just put that to edges. I'm going to turn off the forces for now, and really quickly, I'm just going to show you under position icon operator on your right. If you click on location and change that from pivot to vertices, you can see exactly how the particles are being emitted. So the vertices are, let me click on edges, and you can see that they're emitting basically from the edge of the emitter. Pivot is from the center of the pivot point. Surface is basically directly on the surface of the emitter. So playing around with some of these, you can definitely get different reactions from the particles. So try playing around that for a bit. So click on the speed operator. Basically this helps the speed of the particles, how they're shooting out. So depending on the value of the speed, which I have put to 159, I'm also going to try the direction. Trying some different types of direction here, like icon center out. You can see how the particles are being shot out. And let me see, going to icon arrow out, you can basically see what, so not much big difference between those two. And the random operator basically helps the particles rotate depending on the setting you choose. The display right now, this is the display operator. Right now they're in ticks, so I'm actually going to change those to circles, and I'm going to try bound embosses. You can see all the different types of ways the particles can be shown. Basically, this would definitely helps visualize what the particles are basically going to look like. So try playing around with that, and with that, if you play with the shape operator, you can change the size and different type of shapes like cubes and whatnot. So whatever helps, definitely help you visualize the effect a lot. So alright, so okay, so you saw a few of the operators I was working with so far using the force mainly. We're basically gonna keep going and just show you just a few more stuff, few more operators, and we're just going to play around so we can get a good feeling of how the particles are behaving, and again, just playing around just so we can get a good feel of exactly how we're going to build the system that we're going to be using for effect. So right now I'm going to just delete the forces for now. I'm going to keep the force operator there, and later on we'll put back the forces that we're using and just try out some stuff later. So let's see. Right now I'm going to go back to particle view, and what I'm going to do is right now I'm going to turn off rotation for now, and I'm going to basically start putting together a system that we're going to use for our basically for our effect. And so right now we turn off rotation. Everything's right now, the particles just going off in a straight line. We're gonna go to shape, and we're gonna keep it on cube for now, but let's lower the size a bit. So I'm gonna change that to 2.0. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create like these lines going basically in this path. So you know, it's gonna be pretty short. The particles are basically going to be put together really short. So you can also change the display of the particles. There's a little circle that will appear next to the display operator, and you can change the color to you want. I'm going to change the speed from icon arrow out to let me see, not random horizontal, but you can see we got some a pretty cool spread going on here with the particles. So let's change the location on the position icon to surface, and again, just to show you, how they're behaving here. And I'm just going to change the amount under the birth from 200 to 75. And we don't want that many particles to shoot out. It's not like we're going to need like millions and millions of particles happening here. So I'm going to go down to operators, and I'm going to click on spawn. So the spawn operator is going to help us basically create the effect we want by changing the spawn option, changing everything by travel distance. And you can see we got a pretty weird thing happening here, but we're going to fix that. So if you're running on a very slow machine, I apologize for this. Especially if it's, if you don't really got a fast machine, sometimes particles can, wreak havoc on people's machine. So I'm just going to change the birth down to 40. I'm going to change the spawnable percentage under the spawn operator to 100 to 50. Just to make sure that we're not bogging down our machine at all here. So playing it safe. If we keep going down, I'm going to change the inherit to 10. So you can see what happens is we have these particles shooting out almost in a straight line, and this is what we're going to do to have these things follow basically this linear path. And we got some, even looking at this, you can probably come up with like a lot of ideas. Like this looks like some sort of vegetation that can grow, that's growing and stuff like that. If you look at the endpoints, so when you play around with particles, you tend to find out these different ways to do things. So I'm gonna go to change the inherited to 10 to 2.0, and basically this is sort of like bringing the particles more closer together, just to get like a sort of a straight line going on here. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new event by just dragging the shape normally and connecting the spawn to that new event. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the shape from a cube to a sphere. And what's going to happen is we're going to see these new particles spawn. And I'm going to just change and you can see the particles there. I'm just going to change the display from text to geometry and change the color, and you can see the red is the new particles that are being spawned in that event. Alright, so we're getting there. We're starting to build exactly what we want to accomplish here, but we're still pretty far from it. So we want the particles to shoot out pretty straight and pretty linear. So let's try to get a little bit more control on our particles. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to check my settings. I'm going to change the emitter Under birth, I'm going to change the emitter. Let's see. And if we look at how the particles are right now, actually, let's go to. See, I'm going to throw a delete operator into the event O2, and what's going to happen is they're going to come out in a straight line, but I don't want it to constantly just keep coming out with a straight line. So we're going to use the delete operator and change the lifespan so that when they do shoot out, basically they should have a tail, they should end. We don't want everything just to keep going and going. We want these particles to basically just keep moving from left to right, and basically not have, these particles just, stay on. Trying out different, we're just going to try out certain ways to get the particles to die off. So if you add delete and you go to particle age, change it into lifespan, we'll have them delete. Obviously, the shorter it is, the more shorter that the particles are going to delete. The longer it is, the longer they stay on. So later on, we may tweak that depending on how the animation works out. But you can see, if you play back, you can see exactly how everything's working so far. All right, pretty cool so far. So let's bring back a few of the forces that we had earlier, and I'm just gonna take a little sidestep and just see how these particles react, because some of the the best things you can come up with is just going off and exploring stuff. So I'm gonna put back the wind, I'm gonna put back the vortex, I'm gonna go back to my particle view, and I'm going to add those forces, and I'm going to add the vortex and the wind back into the force operator we created, and turn it on and just see how things react. And there you go. That's pretty cool right here. It's like a bunch of things growing straight out. Really cool effect. If you're ever trying to do like some sort of missile, like some missile shooting off, you want the particles to go up, this is a really cool way to do it. Pretty cool, huh? Really nice. Don't worry about right now. If you notice that we have some green blocks right now, that's just because we have the shape still on in that event. So basically from the first event that we created. So don't worry about that right now. We'll turn that off later. But you can see the effect that we did. It looks pretty cool. So it's good to document some of this stuff that you're working on, because you never know with particles. Sometimes it's just like a hit and miss when you create things. But you end up definitely creating all this really cool stuff, just by changing a value here and a value there, and adding a force here and adding a force there. So definitely cool to explore some of the things that go into particles. So about those green squares, I'm actually going to change the display. I'm going to turn that off so we can just get rid of those green boxes, because they're just a little bit distracting. And just playing back and just see how the particles looks. I mean, we're definitely having something really cool happening here. And again, exploring and just like coming up, changing a value here, you can definitely come up with something that you never thought you either seen before and you thought you would have done. So I'm going to change under the spawn operator in the event 1 divergence to 0, just so that the particles are more unified together and not that much spread happening at the bottom, because you see some of the particles just spreading out a bit. So if I change it back to 20, you can see what happens. And changing that to in units is not what we want to do, but again, you're coming up with the different ways how the particles behave. Really cool stuff. So definitely playing around with some of the values, and again, you can change how the speed works, you change how the units are, and come up with different things. So something like this, I can save this, because in case I have to do like some sort of missile effect of like these ballistic missiles happening and stuff like that, I know the settings to use. So I'm going to change the divergence to 5.0, so it wasn't as much, and you can see the difference in the values when you change them, what happens to the particles, and how close they stay together. So we have the lines going so far, and this is like pretty much the the first step on getting the effect we want. We just want to make sure that the particles are not like spreading, it looks weird. We want to create basically these linear lines and stuff. So again, if you have ideas, just to like always remember those ideas that happen when you're sort of making a particle system, because you want to sort of come back to that stuff. So playing around the vortex, I'm just sort of playing around just to see how everything looks and see if it helps help us get the create the effect we want. So playing with the taper and taper value, and just trying out different things right now. And you can definitely see exactly how the settings affect the particles, just by getting a better visualization of how they're looking now compared to how we had them before. So just trying to get ideas of how I want the particles to react and whatnot. So just gonna do a quick render here of this. So this looks pretty cool. And again, playing around with those settings, if you're creating like some swoosh types, some swooshes and stuff like that through some sort of 3D environment, you know what to do. You know exactly, how to set that up, and you know the values that you have to put in the settings. So again, good idea to document some of this stuff in case you ever have to go back and you have to try different effects. So I'm just gonna keep playing with some of the values here just to see what I can come up with. Pretty cool. Changing the orbital speed a bit just to see how it looks. Pretty cool so far. So I'm gonna go back to the particle view and just play around with a few more things here. All right. So let me see. So let's try. Let me see. I'm gonna try adding a scale operator here, and I sort of want to see exactly what I can play with. And if you mess around with this scale factor, first I'm going to change the type 2 relative first. Changing some of the values on the XYZ. You see, you can see right there how the particles are being affected, and we're just trying to play around right now with a few stuff, and you can see some of the randomness that's happening there. Changing the variation, obviously, you see all the lines are scaled in different ways. So right now, just experimenting, seeing what I can get out of using the scale operator. So I'm going to play with the bias a bit and just change that to center just to see how things look. So again, it's really, a lot of it's exploring and, trying to figure out exactly how how you want to get the effect you want. And, again, you usually come up with like really cool stuff during the process. And it's good. Again, it's good as a an artist to just remember this stuff. Save out like different files when you create different things, and come back to it later and just play around with it. So let me see. So I think the scale, there's definitely some stuff that you can explore using the scale operator. All right. And let's see. So for now, I'm going to delete the scale and let's start putting together some final setup for this. So I played around already with a few operators, so I'm starting to get a really good idea of how I want to set up everything right now. So let's see. So for now, I'm just going to clean up some of the old Force stuff. And let's see, I'm just going to turn this off for now. Let's just replay the timeline so you see how the particles are. So I'm going to go to position icon. I'm actually going to change the location. Let's see, actually I'm going to put on vertices. I'm not going to worry about the force for now. Or not, let's turn it on actually. Let me see. Let's remove the vortex and keep the wind. So the idea is that we're going to have these particles shoot up and basically again follow a path. Alright, so let's see. Change the position icon location to edges. And again, just going to play around with some of the location of how the particles are. And I guess we're going to stick with pivot for now. And just going to play around a little bit more. Just again, just trying to get a good feel of exactly how this is going to be accomplished. Okay. Just going to move the wind force over. I'm going to try out some of the strength a bit. And you can see how the particles are being affected with the strength. The lower it is, you can see that they're just they're curving up. Pretty harshly here. So you can see exactly how they're, playing with the strength. You can definitely see the behavior of the particle system right now. So the idea is that we want them to shoot up, but again, we want to try to make it more linear. And you can see what happens when you mess with some of the wind options like turbulence. You see how you got that, they're wiggling a bit. So that's basically that's cause of the value that we added in turbulence. So right now they're just looking like little snakes flying through the emitter. So really cool thing just to play around with a bit. But I'm going to change that back to 0. So again, so the wind is at 0, 0. The wind's at 0. Let's go back to the particle view. And let's see, I'm just gonna bring the vortex back in and play around with some of the stuff. So you can see we definitely had something that's, ooh, that looks pretty weird so far. So let's change the strength, because the strength is pretty low. Particles actually shooting down. So let's bring that back up a bit. And again, just playing around with the particles. Just trying out something, just trying out some different things. So if we go to particle view, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's see, alright, so I'm just going to turn off let's try adding the drag. Force here. So I'm just going to add I'm going to add that drag to the force 01 that we created for the first emitter. And basically the drag, what that's going to help us do is sort of just push back depending on whatever axis, the axis value that we choose to, you'll see the particles just basically be pulled back a bit. So I'm just going to, and same, it works basically kind of like the, what I was showing you earlier about time on and time off, playing with that. And if you're playing around with the y-axis, z-axis, and x-axis under the linear dampen, just see how, again, you can see basically how the particles are, being affected. So definitely, again, about exploring just different ways you can play with the particles. And again, trying to experiment here on, getting a pretty good effect. And trying out spherical dampen, you can see exactly how the particles are being affected by that. So again, another good thing to remember. So I'm just going to change my timeline up a bit just to see exactly what happens after frame 100. So again, depending on the timing, right now from 0 to 100, after that 100 frame, they just fly off and go back to doing behaving normally. So if we push that value up a bit to 300, play the timeline, you'll see exactly what's happening because of that drag force that we added right there. And there you go, they just shoot off. So again, another force that's pretty useful to basically, help experiment with like different ways to get the particles to behave. So definitely really cool. And just playing my timeline just to just see how they react. And again, just trying to get a good feeling of the particle emitter. All right, so let me see. So I'm going to get rid of the drag, and what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go back to my particle view. I deleted my drag, so it left the delete thing right there. But don't worry about that. Let's turn off the forces for now. I am going to basically go to speed by icon operator, and what we're going to do is that we're going to drag the speed by icon. We're going to drag that into event 01, and what happens is that it basically creates this icon here, which is going to be used to tell the particles to follow basically where this is going to go. Now, the cool thing here is is that we can set this up onto basically a spline using path constraint, and this is basically the setup we're going to use to get the final effect we want to do. So that's the speed by icon, and what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to basically set up a path. So if I go to standard primitives, actually let's go to shapes, and let's go to splines and add a line. So what I'm going to do is roughly create this pretty the shape based off my grid here, and just have a few twists and turns there, kind of like I'm creating a road or something. Alright, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to name this line to the path. This is the path that we're going to use. Let's click on our speed by icon, and we're just going to change the name to fx underscore speed underscore by icon, by underscore icon, and let's just position it. And what we're going to do is go to constraint. I'll go to animation constraints, and then click on path constraint. And what you do is that this line is going to appear, which is basically going to take that line and point and click it to the path that we created. So I click on the line, and you can see what happens is that the icon already aligns itself to the spline path, and we have all these options available to us in the path parameters. So if I play my timeline, you can see exactly what's happening. You can see that you can already see that the particle emitter is already going, linearly across, basically. So you don't see like any curves or anything like that. So it is somewhat following the line path, but this is exactly what we want to do. We want to have these lines follow this linear path, not specifically the path we created, but a randomness of basically a variation of that. So I'm just going to change my timeline to 1000, because that's basically the length of the animation that I want to accomplish here. So you can definitely see what happens. It is definitely following the path, and it's definitely creating like this linear look, and that's what we want to do. So we're going to have these particles go as the camera goes across. We're going to have these particles basically come up and take a turn here, take a turn there, and basically go across go across all the graphics that are going to be appearing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, click back on fx underscore emitter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the fx underscore speed underscore by icon that we created, and let's play with some of the settings. And so if we try out the acceleration limit, you can basically see that they're going off. So a low value is not what we want here. So let's just change that back to 50, just to get more control of exactly how they're going to be following the path here. And let's see, I'm just going to raise that back to 100, and actually change it to 200, and let's see what happens. So right now they're staying more together, but we want a little bit of variation going on. So if I click on speed variation under the FX speed options, you can see that some are beginning quicker than others, and that's really cool. We want a little bit of offset in that animation. And you can see the difference when you have it on and off. So we definitely want to play around with some of the variation a bit, so that there's not so much happening at the same time. We want some to start start slower than others, the other ones begin, and we want others to begin faster. So changing the min and max percentage, changing the value, you're gonna get these type of different variations. So we're gonna have these things go across the screen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the max value from 100 to 50 and just see how the effect looks. There you go. Alright, so continuing, playing the timeline, just seeing how the particles react. So again, changing the variation of the speed, having some start early, some start not. Again, depending on the min and max, you can definitely see how the behavior is, and some will get to the end point of that path earlier than others. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna play around a bit here, and just gonna click on steer towards directory. Now, what will steer towards do is basically the particles will curve and not basically stay on that linear path there. So another thing to explore when you're messing with the speed by icon. So if you're looking for something that curves and whatnot, obviously you can just change the path and play around with steer towards trajectory. So for now I'm just going to turn that off, and I'm just going to play my animation one more time just to see how it looks. And again, just trying to get a good feel of how the particles reacting. So I'm going to click my emitter. I'm going to go back to the particle view, and what I'm going to try to do here is I'm just going to lower the size a bit, because right now the lines are a little bit too chunky. So I'm going to change that to 5.0, because we want the lines to be pretty thin as they're coming on. Scale is going to be something that we have to think about when the graphics are going to be appearing right there. So we have these tubes growing on. It's kind of like that old Windows screensaver. I'm not sure if any of you guys remember that one, but so we have these pipes coming on, and probably gonna just do a quick render test. So what I'm gonna do here is actually gonna check my settings real quick here. So don't worry about the render settings for now. I'm just gonna try to do a quick render test here. So what's going to happen here is I'm just going to make a camera. You can create a camera just by, when you're in your viewport, if you press Control C, you can quickly just create a camera. So with that camera, I'm just going to call that scene_camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a quick little render test. But what I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to add a material on the onto the particles. So basically, it's going to be a straight white self-illuminated material here. And see, I'm just going to assign the material to the selection, but nothing changed. So I might have to actually go into the let's actually go into the particle view, and actually have to use the material. We're just going to use the material static, and we're going to put that into the event 01 and take the material, and I'm just going to change that to compact material instead of slate, and just drag it into the none option under the material static operator that we created. And so I'm just going to call that illuminated, and if we drag it, you can see, well, we haven't got a change. Now the reason we don't have a change is because the material stack is under the first event. So let's drag that into the event 02, and we have our material working correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to do a quick render render animation of this. So what I'm going to do is, let me see. Alright, so we're going to set up this just to do a quick render test. So we're going to do actually a render preview. So if you go into the tool, grab viewport, and create animated sequence, you should be able to basically save out a quick animation. So what we're gonna do, it's basically gonna save like a little movie file. So you can, from here, you can change your settings, how you want it to be displayed in preview, geometry, shapes, lights, all that stuff. You can change, the frames per second, and how it's gonna be rendered. So I'm gonna create this. I'm gonna pause for a second, and then we're gonna basically take a look at our animation. So I'm just gonna let this render. Alright, so we're back and we have our video saved, and just in case, you might actually have to find exactly where Max saves all its previews, and let's just check out the video that we created. So we're getting the effect we want. We're having these particles follow this linear path, which is really cool, and they're all going in basically the same way the path is set up. And a lot of them, there is a little bit randomness to it, which is good. This is what we definitely looking for. And we definitely set up something pretty cool, so we're gonna definitely use this system. And this is a good opportunity for you to play around again with some of the values, try out different variations under the FX speed icon, and just try out different things. So you get the idea of how the setup's going to be and what we're going to use to basically put behind all the graphics that we're going to render out. So it's definitely really cool setup so far. So I'm probably going to play around with some of the values, and again, just try out different things, and look how just you got a good feel of how the animation's going so far. And it's all looking nice, it's all flowing well. The speed of it looks good so far. So again, you can right now take the time before we move on to the graphics portion, and just try out different previews of the animation. Again, play around with the variation, play around with some of the speed, and just see what you can come up with and try to do something really cool. So right now we're basically going to end this part. In the next section, we're going to basically start working on our graphics. We're going to play around with some of the materials, just show you how those set up, and basically just start building everything. Okay. All right, so I'll see you guys in the next section.